Hello, friends. Welcome to Peace and Power Ukraine, a place to discuss all aspects of policy related to Ukraine. Ukraine sits at the crossroads of modern history, where East meets West and freedom meets totalitarianism. Thank you for joining us during these unprecedented times for peace negotiations, which are challenging the Trump administration and Putin and Ukraine. Really, the entire world's focused. As always, we want to dig deeper. We want to bring more light than heat. And in today's podcast, I'm joined by Marc. Marc is the General Counsel of Advancing American Freedom, founded by Vice President Mike Pence in 2021. AAF is ranked the fourth most productive conservative organization in filing friend of the court briefs, in particular with the Supreme Court. And prior to joining AAF, Marc was the Deputy Assistant General Counsel of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. He's also formerly a staff director, chief counsel to the U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee on Criminal Justice, a former senior advisor at the U.S. Department of State in the Bush administration. He has a BA, majoring in Spanish, believe it or not, from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and also a Juris Doctorate from George Mason University. So welcome today, Marc.
Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, it is great to have you. And I first wanted to just start off with your trip to Ukraine with the Vice President. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how you experienced Ukraine. When was that trip?
So this was June of 2023. And for those of you without access to internet, that was right after the Wagner Group had attempted their coup attempt or whatever that was. Mm-hmm. So we thought, the Russians are going to be a little distracted. Now might be a good time to go to Kyiv. And so what was a little interesting, kind of a little bit anxiety producing, was that we had to go into Poland and then take a night train into Kyiv.
Right.
So the State Department had let the Russians know that there was a very important person on that train and that they needed to stay away from any kind of military activity along that route. But given the fact that it was right after the Wagner Group's attempt to move north and take on the central government, we weren't sure which faction found that to be helpful information.
Right. You never know in times of war how different messages will be received.
When the train stopped right next to a large petroleum supply, we thought, maybe this is not going to end well.
Yeah, a little bit of a target-rich environment that might have been too tempting.
Right, high-value target. So it was an important time in the U.S.-Ukraine relationship to go and meet with civilians, military people. We met with President Zelensky. It was very moving to meet people who actually confronted the Russian assault and turned them back from their village. To meet people in the villages whose homes were partially destroyed while they were in the house from artillery fire. All of them had their homes repaired through Samaritan's Purse.
Okay.
And so
that's Franklin Graham's organization.
Yes, that's right. And so Edward Graham is the president, Franklin's son, the grandson of Billy Graham. And so Edward was there with us to show us around and introduce us to key civil society leaders, church leaders, and the like. And the wonderful thing about Edward Graham that most people don't know is that he spent most of his career in the Special Forces. So he really understood the military implications of what was happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it sounds like it was a pretty well-rounded trip. It wasn't just policy meetings in the grand halls in Kyiv. You got out into the villages and saw the people up close in person, understood their stories. What did that look like? I've been to Kyiv a number of times and been in the outskirts, but I have not been to Bucha, Irpin, some of that. Was that part of the trip?
Yeah,
To
so
understand?
we were in Bucha. The first place that we stopped was Moshun, which was a forested area on the outskirts of Kyiv. And when Russian mobile units initiated their attack against Kyiv, they had to go through this village. And the villagers all knew that there were only a few forest roads. And so they laid an ambush and they used U.S. anti-tank weapons to destroy armored units and force them back because there was no other way to get through that forest. And, the locals knew the local terrain. And so we got to meet some of the people who pushed the Russians back. And that was just a remarkable experience to see someone who survived to tell the tale of the first European war since World War II.
Right.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear those stories and see people that were willing to shed blood on their own land and fight and do whatever it took. I also assume that as part of this, they got to greet the vice president, and that Vice President Pence was known to the average Ukrainian at some level.
He was. I mean, Pence has long been outspoken that we need to safeguard NATO's flank by stopping the Russians in Ukraine. That if they're if they break deterrence and they are moving into another country, as soon as they cross a NATO line, that obligates us under our treaty obligations to send in U.S. troops. And so he's been very outspoken. He's very well known in Ukraine. I think a really thing that was very moving for Vice President Pence is to meet these villagers who had their homes, had the roofs ripped off in winter. And it was Samaritan's Purse. It was the generosity of the American people that repaired their homes and had them be able to last through the winter in a village that they knew, and they didn't have to become refugees. And so there were villagers hugging him and in tears, telling them how grateful they were to American donors.
Yeah, they have been powerfully on the ground there for years now. Samaritan's Purse. I was able to hear some of their story when they were a featured speaker at the National Prayer Breakfast in Kyiv when I first went in June of last year. So yeah, they continue amazing work. I'm so glad to hear about that. I understand that when Vice President Pence was there, obviously he had policy meetings. I assume that one of the messages that hopefully came through was that during the Trump-Pence administration, there was no attack on an invasion of Ukraine. And indeed, it was the Trump-Pence administration that provided Javelin missiles that were so important in repelling that assault and pushing back the Russian forces.
It's that critical support to people who are fighting for their own freedom that it maintains deterrence. And that's the critical thing, is Putin detected weakness in the United States, he detected weakness in Europe, and he decided to just engage in an unprovoked attack, thinking that this would be, a Russian version of a blitzkrieg, that they would be able to seize the central government in days. And I mean, you remember when we were watching in real time Russians moving toward Kyiv, and the United States said, why don't we fly you out, give you safe home? And he said, no, what I really need is weapons. I'm staying.
Yep.
Right?
Well, such a powerful moment. I know that the vice president has continued to be active on this issue. He had that experience in Kyiv a year and a half ago, but he hasn't been quiet since then about the fight in Ukraine. He has been a voice that's out there. Have there been additional op-eds? I recall in the Wall Street Journal he had written, some time ago, and he's continued to put out statements.
It's been regular and frequent, and we have a very important story to remind Americans, and that is the linchpin of American foreign policy since the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II has been containment of Russia. And part of that containment policy is to support freedom-fighting people who want to preserve their own liberties, and if they're willing to fight, we are willing to arm them, because we believe that that keeping the Soviet Union, now Russia, bottled up is the greatest preserver of peace. And then what do you do when deterrence is violated?
Right.
When they break out of the deterrence that we've set up, you have to somehow restore deterrence, and that is, don't make this some kind of achievement of Putin. Don't make it to be viewed as a win. And there are some people who sort of parrot the Russian line of Russia being of Putin being a strongman and really being a protector of Russia and Russian values, whatever that is. He's killed 700 to 800,000 Russians, dead and wounded. That's a lot of casualties. That's not somebody that will go down in history as a protector of Russia.
Right. Yeah, the deterrence and containment you talk about is really holding back the furious evil of totalitarianism. And when that happens, freedom is destroyed, the rule of law is destroyed, religious liberty is destroyed. This is the story of the 20th century that is now sadly rearing its ugly head in the 21st century.
Right.
Did you see evidences of that in your trips in terms of, the religious liberty destruction that's happened? Hundreds of churches have been destroyed. Pastors and priests have been imprisoned because they're not of the proper faith, which is just the Russian Orthodox faith is allowed. Was that some of the story that you came to understand on that trip as well?
That's some of it. We met with some prelates in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We met with a wide range of Protestant leaders who Samaritan's Purse pulled together. So various Baptists, other kinds of other varieties of Protestant churches. And, when we went through Busha, we had a wreath laying at the mass grave of all these civilians who were killed. You have to always remember that Putin is former KGB, and one of the missions of the KGB is to spread terror among their opponents. So what they did in Bucha is they pulled civilians from their homes, tied them up with their hands behind them, and just shot them point blank, and left their bodies in the street as a lesson to others not to resist this barbaric act that they were perpetrating. So, as Ronald Reagan used to say, facts are stubborn things, and those war crimes, the outgoing U.S. ambassador to Kyiv said that there are approximately 150,000 documented war crimes in Ukraine. It's just shocking, and we haven't seen anything like that since the Nazis overran Europe.
Right. And we did not have the kind of evidence gathering techniques that we do now, which is why in real time as this war has been unfolding, there have been patriots that have been working to document and record for historical purposes these war crimes so that they are ready to deal with them in international tribunals and courts. And all of this is such important background as we now look and maybe pivot to some of our headlines and see, Trump and Putin having talks this week. They had a long phone call, and depends on who you hear from, what the readout says, whether it's positive or negative. How do you read that phone call? Are you more optimistic or are you less hopeful after reading about that phone call?
I'm always hopeful whenever there is talk, depending on who is in the White House. Right. So what I had hoped would be on that phone call was some chastising by the President of the United States to another foreign leader who, after initial talks on coming to a ceasefire, unleashes the largest drone attack on Ukraine to date. Right? It's just one provocation after the other from Putin to try to humiliate the President of the United States, and it's just outrageous. And here is a guy who has weakened his own country through this unprovoked attack. That now he's relying on 12,000 North Korean troops that he has to pay. He's buying drones from Iran. He's getting bankrolled by the largest human rights abuser on the planet, which is China. I mean, he's finding support under every rock of every bad actor on the planet. And he's just up to his eyeballs in evil. And so it's
really a coalition of evil.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so when he talks with the President of the United States, I don't know what happened. I don't think anybody really knows what happened on that phone call. But I would hope that there would have been a realization that there will be very serious consequences for his bad behavior that I think embarrassed Trump. It's hard to say embarrassed when you like the form of embarrassment is killing innocent civilians, right?
Right.
But that's kind of the world we live in, and I think it's very important that the United States be taken seriously as a great power that promotes peace and liberty throughout the world. And there will always be evil people who want to try to knock us off and move with their own evil desires.
Right. Well, the Wall Street Journal described it this way. After Monday's call, Putin dangled the possibility of a ceasefire for a certain period of time, if appropriate agreements are reached, end quote. As reported by the Wall Street Journal, these conditions included territorial concessions by Kyiv, a radically downsized Ukrainian military, and promises that Ukraine would never join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and that no NATO troops would be stationed in Ukraine, end quote. So it seems to be demands for all one-way concessions, and there was not a single concession or anything that was listed as something Russia would give. Sounds like a great deal.
I would just invite viewers of your podcast to just look on the bookshelf and look at Russian behavior in the past on agreements. I mean, we know that they lied on every agreement they made with the United States during the Cold War, and what we don't bring enough attention to is after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine gave up all of their nuclear weapons in exchange for territorial integrity. And that was completely dismissed. And the reason Ukraine is deeply distrustful of Russia is they remember the forced famine that the Russians imposed on Ukraine in the 1930s. You know, there are people who are still alive who remember that. And so their level of trust is extremely low, particularly a power that targets maternity wards. You know, killing expectant or recently delivered mothers and their children. This was not a military target. So all of that needs to be weighed on whether we can trust words or not. And I think what has been clear, since 1917, dealing with the Russians, is they only understand strength, and they will only understand consequences. So that is going to be the key thing, the key challenge for the Trump administration, is what can they bring to bear in that equation that will make the Russians behave as if they were civilized.
That reminds me of this quote that Vladimir Putin uses. He actually speaks English fairly well. So when he deals with people in negotiations, he will say, well, you have your logic, we have ours. We'll see which one prevails. This is the logic of somebody who believes in the Russian Empire at all of its supreme Ruski mir, this Russian world concept. It's pretty a telltale sign of his worldview.
Well, I mean, it's almost something that George Orwell could have written, right? 2 + 2 is 4, but sometimes it's 5.
Right. When me, as the powerful actor, the powerful man on the world stage, says it is, then it is.
Right.
And in Putin's Russia, if he says 2 + 2 is 5, it is.
Right. And remember, there are who knows how many thousands of Russians who are in prison because they oppose this crazy war. And so they have passed through their rubber stamp parliament. They've passed laws, quote unquote, not really laws, that basically allows the state to sweep people up off the streets and make them disappear because they oppose this meat grinder of a war. So what he's doing to Ukraine, he's also doing to Russians.
Well, Marc, I think this means that we might need some divine providence in this search for peace. We might need a miracle. And we just saw this week that Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio were meeting with the new Pope. So they were with Pope Leo at the Vatican. And one of the things that came out of all of this swirl of news coming out of the Vatican, it really has been the center of the world for the last couple weeks, is that this Pope is willing to host peace negotiations and try to be involved in bringing about a peace in this conflict in Ukraine. So how do you view that potential with this brand new Pope stepping forward?
Well, I hope this Pope remembers the moral authority that Pope John Paul II brought to these questions. And, what John Paul II did is he went to Poland, his native Poland, when it was still under martial law. And what did he tell people? He told them, be not afraid. And
Amen.
That broke the evil empire. 3 words. So I am hoping that this new American Pope can find at the core of his being, a desire to see morality and peace and justice prevail.
Right. Well, it feels like we need that kind of moral clarity in this moment. Putin wants to avoid any kind of negotiations directly with Zelensky, with the Europeans, with NATO, and maybe this could be a path as a third party. Maybe that could be part of it. we can be hopeful. We can think that this might be the way that the Europeans could also see the Pope as a good person on that in between. But are those allies now having trouble trusting us and this current Trump 47 administration, compared to where they were before, because of all the drastic fluctuations in whether it's economic policy or anything else? Are they having trouble trusting us now as a foreign policy partner? Or do you think this is much ado about nothing at this stage?
I think that their feeling of lack of trust is sincerely held. The Europeans are really good at playing games on things, but I think that they are sincerely concerned about this administration, because when Trump tries to soften somebody up for negotiations, he may say all kinds of outrageous things just to soften them up, and then let the negotiations begin. I think it was a bridge too far to say that Ukraine started this war, that they were provoking the Russians to invade. I think that's just ridiculous. I don't really think that Trump believes that, but he did say it, and it really shook our European allies to the core, because that is just not logical. Mm-hmm. It's not true, and it is something that is at complete odds with what our understanding of the Russians, how they act as a military and political entity.
Yep. As we begin to wrap up, I wanted to hit one major topic from Capitol Hill. I know you've spent a lot of time in Washington, also up on Capitol Hill, and we do have a new resolution that Senators Chuck Grassley and Amy Klobuchar have pushed forward today. So they're leading a bipartisan group of lawmakers introducing a resolution demanding the unconditional return of abducted Ukrainian children before any peace agreement with the Russians would be finalized. So this is also supported by Senator Joni Ernst, Dick Durbin, Senator Wicker, John Fetterman, Senator Rick Scott. So you can see a significant bipartisan group, leadership level across both parties. This sends a powerful signal. Is this something that you think that your organization would also support?
Oh, absolutely. And let me just underline the fact that this is being co-sponsored by Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi. He is the chairman of Senate Armed Services Committee. That is a very serious co-sponsorship. When we were in Ukraine, we went to the Center for the Protection of Children's Rights. This was a facility that was generously funded by entities within the EU to help children who had been abducted to find their way into homes where people will put them up temporarily, maybe adopt them, offers psychological services. So we met a young man, he was about 14 years old. He had been abducted, sent to Russia. They took all of his papers. Typically what the Russians do is that they will Russify a name and try to place them into an adoptive family and essentially brainwash them, tell them that we rescued you from a Nazi regime. We're going to, educate you in the way that, we free Russians understand the world. And so he escaped on foot and got back onto Ukrainian territory and got out of the war zone when he was picked up. And he had no concept of where his family was. They may have had survivors within his family, but with the turmoil when we were in Ukraine, it was hard to track people. So we met the mother, or the woman who had taken him in, and she was just in tears meeting Vice President Pence, to just relay the evil that was done to her foster son. And, this young man wanted a picture with Pence too, right? I mean, it was just like typical boy. And, I have a son who was about his age at the time. Very moving to think about the outrage against innocent young people. And there's just a massive trafficking in persons. Maybe 20,000 Ukrainian children have been abducted. And we were told there that what the Russians do is they assign them a new birth date and a new name so that they can never be tracked. Wicked.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's that kind of story that really brings it home for all of the mothers and fathers who are out there. We just celebrated Mother's Day. With Father's Day is coming up, can you imagine what the experience would be like if that was your son or daughter? I've got a 15-year-old son, so it really is true when you put it in those stark terms.
And the way the KGB taught Putin to use terror. Terror is most effective when there's a strong element of the unknown. In some ways it's more cruel to have doubt as to what happened to your daughter. Is my daughter dead? Is my daughter somewhere in Russia? And what are they doing to her? Right? It's the unknown that is more effective as a terror.
That's a powerful point. As we close out today, Mark Waite, if there's one thing you want to leave us with that you just didn't get a chance to maybe address or bring our conversation to a close, what might that be?
I think that we should just not unlearn everything that we learned in the Cold War about how Russia behaves. And the critical element of trying to deter their military aggression is not just to save the liberty of others, it's to save our own men and women who are in the armed services. And if this war extends beyond into NATO borders, we are obliged under our treaty obligations and just through our own prudential judgment to meet the enemy. And so we need to help countries who are fighting for their own freedom. Right. And that was that was the insight of Ronald Reagan. It's still sound judgment.
Right. Well, thank you for that closing note. It's great to be with you, Mark Waite. And if folks want to follow the work of Advancing American Freedom, where might they go?
Just go to our website, advancingamericanfreedom.com. If you click on the little pull-down window on legal stuff, you'll see all of the amicus briefs that we are filing. We're very proud to engage the full spectrum of everybody on the right on these issues, and we've been very productive and a good investment.
Great. Well, thank you for your work. Thank you for Vice President Pence standing with Ukraine, and we'll see all of our listeners and viewers next time here on the Peace and Power Ukraine pod.